episode of Three True Values. I'm your host, James Fletcher, and we are going to run through all things college basketball. We've got a big episode for you lined up in this first segment. What we're going to do, we're going to take a look. The committee has ranked the top 16 teams in the field as they would select them if Selection Sunday had in fact been this past Saturday. So we'll take you through those 16 teams. What did it say about not only those teams that were listed, but about the rest of the teams that will be selected in the field? What did it say about some of the teams that missed out on those top 4 seeds? Then, how did the weekend impact how we view what was said Saturday morning? When we get done with that, we'll take a break. In the second segment, we ran through the ACC recently. I wanted to run through a little bit of the SEC because there's been some talk about this being one of the strongest conferences in college basketball, but there's also quite a few SEC teams who are hovering around the bubble a little bit too close for comfort right now. So we'll take you through what is it that's going on in the SEC, how many of those teams can feel like they're safely in the field, how many have more to do, and which ones might get left out on Selection Sunday. When we get done with that, we will come back and, as always, get you the games of the week so that you can be the best prepared for the biggest games in college basketball over the next 7 days. So, with all that said, with all that on the docket, let's go ahead and get into this. Let's talk about those top 16 seeds revealed by the NCAA Selection Committee on CBS Saturday morning. We had on the one line, I think it was pretty expected what we got there. We got Purdue number 1 overall, followed by UConn, and then Houston, and Arizona came in 4th. Now, it was said on that broadcast after the reveal that that order was unanimous among the selection committee members. You had Purdue getting the top overall spot. Now, are they number 1 in the metrics? No, but they're number 2 in most of the metrics. At least they were at that time. You couple that with the best resume in the country, makes sense to put them in at number 1. UConn, despite being below Houston in some of the, if not all of, the computer metrics, they too have a slightly better resume if you look at it over the course of the entire season. They also carry 1 less loss, which does matter. And so UConn slots in to that 2nd spot. Now, there was debate online about those two, which order those two should be in. I think a lot of it stems from that the AP poll has had UConn ahead of Purdue for quite a while now. It's important to remember that the AP poll has nothing to do with the NCAA tournament. I mean, that's there just for you to know what's going on when you check the ESPN app or the CBS Sports app or whatever app you use, Bleacher Report, to know the biggest games. That's all that really is there for at this point in time, because the net rankings are what matters. Ken Pom has been the most accurate metrics over recent years. You've got Torvik, which does good work with predictive measures. There's really not much need for the AP poll anymore, other than it's a tradition. It's something that is ingrained in college sports, and so we continue to put it out. Really, though, there are questionable things done on those ballots each and every week, and so the AP poll should be used as a guideline of what is happening. Let me put it this way. It's more like a power ranking than it is a complete evaluation of each team's body of work. Perfect example, just a couple weeks ago, Dayton loses a game in the A-10, which is not one of the strongest conferences in America. Well, they end up moving up 2 spots in the AP poll. And you think, well, that's interesting. There must have been an oversight there. Surely there was. But the next week, they go undefeated. They pick up some good wins, take care of business. Teams around them drop games. Now, typically what you would assume would happen is Dayton would move up a couple spots. That's just every team that was ahead of them, behind that, they all moved up just a couple spots. the ones that won games. Dayton did not. They stayed stationary, which was a reaction to what was said the week before when they moved up instead of down. So these are people making decisions rather than numbers about what the season has been so far for the team. Now, like the net ranking, it'll move a team up after a loss. It doesn't care. If they played better than they have played the rest of the season, it will recognize that. If a team is 14 and 11, but they look like one of the best teams in the country, it'll keep them up there longer than a person would who is under pressure to react to results on the floor. So that's just a little bit of an insight into why Purdue is ahead of UConn when this comes out on Saturday. Now, obviously, we then see on Saturday, UConn routs Marquette, who is number 4 in the AP poll, despite being lower in the eyes of the selection committee than that. Then on Sunday, we see Purdue drop a game to Ohio State, who is clinging on to the wrong side of the bubble, if they're even in the picture at all at this point. So now we've got to take a fresh look at things. I think that UConn has surpassed Purdue at this point just barely. Just barely. I mean, I'm talking if UConn does not play well against Creighton today, I think it could flip back. So this is by no means is this race done. We've got a whole nother month of this back and forth between these two schools in particular and Houston, who can still find themselves in there as well. I mean, they just picked up a huge win over Iowa State last night. And so they're no slouch in here. They're putting up the big resume building wins as well. So those three, as we've said for quite a while now, have separated themselves. And then you get Arizona as the last of the number 1 seeds to make it in the selection committee's first rankings. So Arizona, they get the nod. I think rightfully so. They're the highest in the highest in the net rankings. They've got good KenPom numbers. And no one else around them has really seized the opportunity that they left out there a couple weeks ago to jump onto that 1 seed line. We saw North Carolina drop games. We've seen Tennessee drop games. There's just been a little bit of sloppy play from the 2 seeds or projected 2 seeds in recent weeks. So then we go to the next line here, and we've got North Carolina as the top overall 2 seed. I found that very interesting because they've dropped multiple games over the last couple of weeks. They've dropped games against Clemson, against Syracuse. They just have not looked as sharp as they did in recent weeks. Now, they put together a big win streak for a while there that had you really encouraged by what they were and the trajectory they were on, that they potentially could make it into that conversation as a 1 seed candidate. But I thought that Tennessee was right there, if not ahead of where they were at that time. But the committee did not view it that way. They have North Carolina 5th overall on the 2 line as the top team there. And then Tennessee came in 6th. From there, we had Marquette as the 7th team and Kansas as the 8th team. And Kansas getting a little bit of a bump here. What I would refer to as the blue blood bump. Because Kansas is not top 8 in there's no metric, there's no combination of metrics you can string together that tell you that Kansas is a 2 seed today. But they came in as the number 1 projected team in the country. They have star power. They still are a really good basketball team. And so they're getting that nod for the final spot on the 2 line right now. And I think that that is important because as we get to this next tier of teams, they're teams that probably have a better resume right now to be a 2 seed. So what can these teams do to jump Kansas and get onto that line? I think the top team, number 9 overall, is Alabama, and that's going to be the interesting one to watch because they have a few more losses than some of the teams that are around them at this point in the bracket. But their resume is also just about as clean as anyone's. And their analytics, they're number 5 now in the net rankings. So what does Alabama have to do to jump Kansas? I think that's something that we will see. I think for sure one SEC team is going to get at least a 2 seed. here because we see Tennessee already in that conversation. If Alabama is able to win out or whichever, I think really, as long as one of Alabama, Tennessee, or Auburn wins the SEC title, I think that we are going to get a 2 seed from the SEC. If not that final 1 seed slot, that'll depend on what Arizona and North Carolina do, as we've seen with them being ranked ahead at this time. So there's a lot to unpack there. Baylor, Iowa State, and Duke, the last of the 3 seed teams in that order. I think it was interesting that Baylor lands ahead of Iowa State because Iowa State's numbers are better. But we've talked about Iowa State. They scheduled so well. I think that there's a little bit of a hesitance maybe by the committee to move them up all the way to where their numbers say they are, because there's still questions about whether they really are what they appear to be when we look at that resume. Then Duke, of course, they get in there as well. Now the 4 seeds. And this is where I think one of these teams is probably ranked too low, although I can't tell you 100% who I would move down for. I think it'd probably be Duke. Maybe you got the blue blood bump there a little bit. But Auburn comes in as the top 4 seed candidate. Now, I mean, they are number 7 in the net rankings here. And an Auburn team that has picked up some really big wins in recent weeks. Now, they left some to be desired at the top of their rankings before that, but they've got 2 quad 1 wins, they've got 5 quad 2 wins, and only 6 losses overall. So that's a really good team there. A team that has shown that they can not only beat some of the best teams, but blow them out of the water when they get them in the right situation. Now, they did lose to Kentucky over the weekend, so that's going to hurt them. I think they stay on this 4 seed line, and so I don't think it impacts them too much. But when you're already ranked a little bit lower than maybe you would have expected, and then you drop a game, it can be a cause for some concern that you might lose that regional hosting ability. San Diego State comes in at 14, and this was the big one. This was the one that, for me, it was kind of like, okay, I might have that team 1 higher, might have that team like 2 lower, whatever the case was. I was kind of on board with how they were going. And then San Diego State pops up, and I go, whoa. Okay, I don't think I had seen anyone coming into the day who had San Diego State in a top 4 seed spot. Now, their numbers are great. I'm not taking anything away from them. They are on the border of being a 4 seed candidate. What I thought was so interesting was what it means for the Mountain West. Because for the Mountain West, this is massive. Because it means that all these losses that you take to each other, right? San Diego State plays Colorado State, Utah State plays Nevada, New Mexico plays Boise State. All of those matchups, when you take losses to each other, those aren't killing your numbers. San Diego State is still 14th in the country despite these games that are being played within that league. That's huge for them because it means that the committee must be higher on the Mountain West than we might have assumed. That's why, if you check out my latest bracketology that dropped on Sunday, I actually moved Boise State and Nevada up without really, they didn't do anything to just wow you on the resume, but I moved them up because it seems like the committee is valuing what that conference has done. So I've now got 6 Mountain West teams in the field, 2 of them in the play-in. So it's no secure deal that they have 6 teams in. But I think this is a really good sign for them as they try to get all of those teams into the field. Then at 15, we have Illinois. I think that was just about right. I think I had them a couple spots higher, but I have no issues with where Illinois is ranked. And then Wisconsin, who pretty much took themselves out of this conversation by losing again. So we can kind of just dump the Wisconsin conversation that we would have had. I don't think that they are really a serious threat to be in this picture the way that they've been playing, losing 4 in a row, I think 5 of the last 6, something like that. So it's gotten ugly for Wisconsin. They've got to get things turned around if they want to stay as one of the top seeds in the country. I saw somebody talking about, are they on the bubble or are they like in the field? And that's ridiculous. I think Wisconsin, I don't know if they could lose out, but they don't have much left to do. I mean, if you were in the conversation, if you received a 4 seed from the selection committee on Saturday, there's no reason that on Sunday we should be having a conversation of whether you're in the field. That's just ridiculous. But that's besides the points. Do want to touch on just briefly before we go to break here, the teams which were listed in a conversation with the selection committee chair as the next ones up, the ones that were discussed for the final 4 seed spot. You had Creighton, Dayton, and Clemson. Now, Clemson was an interesting one. It seemed like that one was maybe a little high for them. I didn't have them near that like 4 seed conversation. I wasn't even considering them when I was talking about 4 seeds, putting together bracketology, even on the Thursday night before it released on Friday. Then they lose a bad game over the weekend, and we kind of can just dismiss that conversation. But Creighton is in that conversation, Dayton as well. And so I think that depending on the results of Wednesday and Thursday, but this game between UConn and Creighton this week is going to be big in determining who that final 4 seed spot is, because if Creighton loses, I think you can probably put Dayton in there. If they win, I think you for sure see Creighton climb into that 4 seed spot. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this plays out. And of course, we will get more updates from the selection committee, as well as more bracketology updates now twice per week. That's right, we're putting them out on Friday morning. So first thing, I mean, really, it's Thursday night. Like if you look at midnight on Thursday, it's usually up there on the website. And then Sunday morning, that one, we'll see. It kind of depends on when all the numbers float in from the previous night. Somewhere between probably 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. is when that one's going to get posted each week. And then I know those are a little bit close together, but we've got to recap all of Saturday's action. We also have on Wednesday morning, you can check out as soon as those numbers update in the system, probably around 8 a.m. as well. You can check out the Bubble Watch, which will tell you the teams that are in the field, the teams that have more work to do, teams on the bubble, teams that are completely out of it. And then also we'll give you kind of a in-depth look at which teams have moved up the most, which teams have moved down the most since the last update a week before. So all that to look forward to. I'm also writing some columns. Generally, those come out on Wednesdays. So tomorrow you can check. I should have one, I think, coming up here, whichever one that might be this week. Didn't look at that schedule before we started this segment. But when we come back on the other side, we're going to talk about the SEC and what they have to do to make sure they get everyone in the field that they are possibly going to have. Welcome back into Three True Values. We keep things rolling. Today, we've got the SEC and a big conversation about what is this conference, because Jimmy Dykes from the SEC Network, of course he works for the SEC Network, so you got to kind of take what he says with a grain of salt, but he thinks that the SEC is the best conference in college basketball this season. I don't think that's true. I think that's the Big 12. I think that the Big 10 probably not as good, but I think that the Mountain West, and if we're talking relative to what they are, the Mountain West is up there as well. So let's just kind of put that talk to the side. Let's talk instead about where these teams stand. We talked about Alabama, Tennessee, and Auburn, their top 4 seeds. We've gone in depth with them a little bit. Not worried about them. They're in the field. Kentucky, also in the field. They have seemingly figured something out over the past week, but as I heard someone talking about this week, because I try to keep up with what everyone is thinking about these things, because Kentucky has clearly been better on defense the last 2 games. Now, when I went on with Andy Staples from On3 over the last week, I kind of brought up that maybe, just maybe, there's a conversation that we need to have about what Rob Dillingham is best at with this Kentucky team, because he is clearly their best NBA draft prospect. He is also clearly their best offensive weapon. He does things to unlock that offense that make them one of the top offenses in the country. But he's also a negative defender. He gets lost sometimes. He does not get through screens well. Part of that's just his build. Part of it is he's just young. And he also came from overtime elite. We got to remember that. Like, this guy was not playing high level, organized basketball at a prep school where they are teaching you drill after, like, he was at overtime elite. He was playing pickup against a bunch of random dudes half the time. So I can't really fault him for not being locked in defensively, knowing all the best techniques and the ways to get around screen. I'm not going to sit here and pick apart Rob Dillingham. I think he'll figure it out. I think he has everything he needs to become a good enough defender to play in the NBA and play well in the NBA. He's still one of, like I said, their top draft prospect. So this is not a negative conversation about Rob Dillingham. It'll be perceived that way, I'm sure, by some. I just wonder, as we've seen his minutes tick down over the last couple of games, he has not cracked 20 minutes in either of these really good defensive performances. I wonder how much Calipari is committing to, we have to, in those minutes down the stretch, it does not matter what you provide us on offense, we have to be solid defensively. Because a commitment there, when you have the lead, will work. Right? You put in Reed Shepherd, who's solid defensively. You put in Ugana Onyenso, really good defensive presence at the rim. And you run with that, and you see if you can hold on to the lead. But what happens when you're trailing? That's what I want to see from this Kentucky team. I think that we've seen good things. We've seen progress over the last week. But how much of that progress is situational in that they were able to build a lead and then just had to protect it? Because that's not going to be, you're not going to go all the way through the NCAA tournament as this Kentucky team. You're going to need Rob Dillingham on the floor late because he's going to have to score points to get you a win at some point throughout the rest of the season. Can he be a plus, not even a plus, just a neutral defender for that short amount of time that you need him to? Because if he can do that, this Kentucky team, their ceiling goes way up for what they can do in March. So that's what I'm watching with that Kentucky team. With this Florida team is in an interesting discussion. Because as it turns out, this Florida team, 18-7 overall, that's the same record as Alabama, who we're talking about as a potential 2 seed. And this Florida team, 12-0 outside of the first 2 quadrants. All right, so you check that box. You're good there. 3-0 in quadrant 2. All right, no losses outside of quad 1. There are only 5 teams in the country who can say that. So we start talking about these teams, and Florida has got to move up. The analytics might not have caught up to it, and they're starting to because they've moved up in the net rankings several days in a row now. But 18-7, 3-7 in quad 1, like, this team is legit. This team has all of the computer numbers you could ever want. The 5 teams are Purdue, UConn, Houston, and San Diego State. All of those are top 4 seeds. So this Florida team is probably not far off from getting into that conversation. They play against Alabama twice the rest of the way. If they can steal one of those games, get one of those, I think we really start talking about this Florida team as a 5 seed who could maybe really break up the party and enter that 4 seed conversation because they are underrated right now. I understand that they give up some big leads, but they also get those big leads and then are able to hold on to them at the end, regardless of what they did earlier in the game. So I think that that's a matter of locking in. As long as they're able to do that, I think this Florida team has got a really high ceiling. Mississippi State also, I think, in the field right now, despite having a quad 4 loss and a quad 3 loss. Those are going to kill you on the resume. I mean, if you look at the rest of their resume, You look at the rest of everything about their body of work, they should be like just pretty solidly in the field. But those two are dragging them down for sure. There's no doubt about it. So they still have more to do to lock themselves into the tournament, but I think right now they're in the field. Then you've got Texas A&M. They are on the bubble. I mean, they are in the last four in conversation here. 10 losses, and it's just hard to get over the 10 losses. And then 6 quadrant 1 wins, so you're like, wow, like this team, yeah, for sure. Put them in the tournament. 6 quadrant 1 wins, that's amazing. But they have 4 quadrant 3 losses. What are they doing? This Texas A&M team is so up and down and up and down. It's so hard to figure it out. And I think this Texas A&M team, more than any other team in this conference, is at serious risk of getting screwed over by the selection committee on Selection Sunday. And when I say screwed over, I don't even mean like, oh, this is just wrong, criminal that they didn't put them in the field. That happened to them a couple years ago, yes. But if it happens this year, you really can't, like, what are you going to point to? I mean, yeah, your resume looks good, but 4 quadrant 3 losses. And you just kept, they kept coming. You kept dropping the games. It's hard to just lock you into the field when that keeps happening. So they've got to find something, get a win streak, because I think 1 win streak, really, just like get a string of games going where you're able to win a couple impressive games, and I think you're in. They don't even have to be quad 1. I already said they have 6 quad 1 wins. That's more than anyone else in the SEC. The most quad 1 wins in the SEC. But we also have to have this conversation about 4 quad 3 losses. I mean, 4 quad 3 losses is absurd. The only other team in the conference who has 4 quad 3 losses is Missouri. Vanderbilt doesn't even have that many. They have 4 if you combine 3 and 4, but in terms of quad 3 losses, nobody has more in the SEC than Texas A&M. So you got to take care of business in those games that you are expected to win handily if you're Texas A&M the rest of the way. And then we've got the two other teams who are dropping in the net rankings, and it's a little bit concerning. South Carolina, now they're a 5-loss team. They've got 3 quad 1 wins, 2 quad 3 losses, so that's not good, but still only 5 losses overall. And what do we do with them? Because they had that big surge. They've got the resume. They've got the strength of record. But it's hard to move them high in the field when the net rankings have them almost outside the top 60 now. The computers just say this team is not as good as you think. And so they're going to get into the field, I think, unless something like comes off the wheels here at the end. But I think we have to have a real conversation once we get into the tournament about matchups, about what level of team they are capable of beating when we get there. Because they got routed. They got the big boost in the rankings and then got routed. It's time to look at this South Carolina team and reassess what we think about them after getting caught up in all the hype the last couple of weeks. And Ole Miss, 19-6. So they're right there. Same thing. 3 quad 1 wins. They have no losses outside of the first 2 quadrants. So what is the problem? Well, the problem is for some reason the computers just say that this team's not very good. You know, like I don't really understand what it is. I'd have to dive real deep into the numbers to get a real grasp of why this Ole Miss team is not ranked high at all. But it's a little bit strange that they're 5-6 in the first 2 quadrants and 14-0 in the bottom 2. And they just, if you were only going off of net rankings, they wouldn't even be close to the bubble. But of course, I've got them as the first team out. I believe they're still the first or second team out of the field. And I think really they just need, if they can add a quad 1 win, I think they kind of move back into that conversation. But they had a little skid there where they were dropping a few games to SEC opponents. So everyone else, once we get beyond there, they're pretty much out of it. LSU, I mean, they're 13 and 12. It's just there's only so much you can do. Georgia, same thing, 14 and 11 now. They're going to pick up more losses, so you kind of rule them out knowing where that's going. Arkansas is under 500, and then Missouri and Vanderbilt, we know where they're at this season. Not been a good year for them, either of those teams. So that's our rundown of the SEC. Hopefully that was insightful. If you have any more questions, you can always hit me up. Happy to talk college basketball whenever we get the opportunity. So when we come back on the other side, we will get you the games of the week and get you out of here and ready for the next week of college basketball right here on 3 True Values. Welcome back in as we give you the games of the week right here on 3 True Values. We're going to start off Tuesday night. That is tonight. If you're getting to listen to this before the games, then you should check out UConn versus Creighton. We gave you a little hint earlier in the show about that one. And then on Wednesday, Alabama is facing Florida. That's a big challenge for Florida team that we just got done raving about. So check that one out. See if they're able to knock off Alabama, or if Alabama can get another boost to the resume, maybe move closer to that 2-seed line. On Thursday, we've got Arizona and Washington State in a battle for really the top of the Pac-12. It's been a weak conference so far, but both those teams in the top 25. Arizona on the 1 line right now. Washington State has surged up into the field as well. On Friday, we don't have any, there's no real good quality games, but we do have Yale versus Cornell, 2 of the top teams in the Ivy League. That could determine the regular season champion in that conference. So go ahead and check that one out if you're watching college basketball on a Friday night. And then on Saturday, we've got another loaded schedule for you. Plenty of games to choose from. We're going to go ahead and list Houston versus Baylor as the game of the day there. A really big one for Houston to keep building that resume, try to surpass Purdue and UConn at the top of the 1-seed line. And for Baylor, who is on that 3 line, can they start to climb up towards the 2 seeds? And then on Sunday, we have Creighton. This is a tough one to try to choose. I think we're going to go Creighton and St. John's. We might go, though. We might just have to edit it. We might have to go with FAU versus Memphis. 2 teams that have really plummeted here. Memphis might be off the bubble. I don't have them on my bubble right now. I've kind of removed them. They're going to have to win the conference tournament if they want to get into the field. FAU has slipped and they're dropping games. They're moving closer to the bubble than they ever wanted to be as well. So can FAU turn things around there? What would a loss against Memphis mean for that team? That one could get messy there in the AAC. South Florida actually leads that conference right now, so that tells you everything you need to know about what's going on with those teams. And then on Monday, as we wrap things up here, we will go North Carolina versus Miami. Miami, in that same situation, they're like almost off the bubble here. Like Miami might be done at this point in the NCAA tournament conversation, but a win over North Carolina, that for sure would get them right back in the mix there to potentially go on a string. They would have to string together more wins than just that. They probably would have to win out in the regular season to have a legitimate chance. But that's all we've got for you today right here on 3 True Values. We'll be back next week to talk about all the storylines across the sport. Be sure to check out my work at On3. In the meantime, we'll be back with you soon.